Welcome to Adventures in Freeze Drying, and today, still being inspired by Nessa's Nook, I am working on filling up my pantry with some cooked, just hamburger and cooked. I meant to do bacon sausage because we love bacon sausage in like our egg casseroles and on pizza, and I accidentally bought 2 regular pork sausages and only 1 bacon sausage, but we will get those cooked together and see what happens. And so we will be right back. One of the things I want to do, since this is going to be freeze dried, I normally just add my spices and stuff as I'm cooking my hamburger to give it flavor, but I'm going to do an extra good job of getting rid of grease on this. So I'm going to season this now and then let this sit for like 10 minutes before I even attempt to cook. So in case you were watching my video about onions, this is the onion powder that I made from those 4 onions. It's half of a jelly jar worth of onion powder. So I'm going to go ahead and instead of chopping up onions and putting them in here, like I do sometimes when I'm cooking fresh hamburger for a meal, and I'm just going to sprinkle this in there fairly generously. I'm not going to measure stuff out. I'm just going to shake some salt on there. Again, this is 4 pounds of hamburger, so I'm doing a little more than I would if this was just a single pound of hamburger. Putting in some pepper. I'll add some more in a second, and then also some Italian seasoning. Again, 4 pounds of hamburger, putting in a little more than I normally would. And then I'm going to take my hamburger masher and get all this mashed and let this sit for 10 minutes. So we'll be right back. While we are letting the hamburger soak up the flavor of my spices, I'm going to go ahead and get my sausage cooked up, hoping that the bacon sausage shares its flavoring with these 2 regular sausages. We really like that. I actually freeze-dried some in my wild rice and cheese soup, and it reconstituted beautifully. So I'm pretty sure this will do well. You're not going to get super long-term storage out of any of this that's super greasy, but that doesn't mean you can't have it for ease of use and not having to use your freezer and all that stuff. So we'll go ahead and get this cooked up. I love using this hamburger thing to get this really into some good crumbles. And so I'll get this cooked up and we'll go on to the next step. My sausage is fully cooked, but you can probably see here it is full of grease. So we're going to start our grease mitigation strategies. My first step in my grease mitigation strategy is simply to put a colander into a bowl that can collect the grease. You don't want your grease going down your drain. And to pour my meat into this colander. And we're going to let this sit for quite a while. And then the next step is going to be to move the meat into some hot water and let it sit till the water cools and the grease solidifies on top. Well, my hamburger finishes up cooking. I've let this sit for a while. It has drained quite a bit. And this is all the grease that I got off of that 3 pounds of sausage. So really glad I sat there and strained that. You don't want that down your sink. However, I don't think that's done yet. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick rinse with some hot water in my sink. And then I'm going to place this back in the pan that I already washed up and let it sit in some hot water. I'm probably setting it in my garage. It's winter to help that water cool a little faster and let that grease rise to the surface and solidify to help me remove it from my meat before I freeze dry it. There are my sausages floating in the water. We'll see if I can get the meat that's floating out of the grease later or not. I might end up draining this a little earlier than expected, just letting this get some extra grease out since I don't think the grease is just going to stick to that meat that's at the surface, and I'm going to lose a lot of meat because of that. Just to put into perspective just how much grease that was, this is your normal ragu spaghetti jar, and it is half full of grease from the sausage. So really make sure if you do sausage, you take care of that grease and get that off of that meat. You do not want that in your freeze dryer. I am incredibly fortunate to get my hamburger, my beef, all from the farm from my in-laws, and it's made for us at the locker. So there's not near as much grease on here as my sausage, but I never know how lean or how fat my hamburger is going to be. And from year to year, it can vary from one steer to the next. So we'll go ahead and follow the same protocol that I followed with my sausage. We're gonna let this sit for a while and drain before we rinse it, and then we'll put it back in the pot with some hot water. The hamburger is not floating like my sausage is, but you'll notice there's a bunch of spices floating to the surface. And I've noticed before when I've rinsed hamburger that a lot of the spices rinse off. That's one of the reasons I let everything sit before I cooked it, so as much flavor could go into the meat as possible, knowing some of those spices are going to rinse right off. I have gone ahead and re-strained my bacon sausage that was sitting in the water. Since it was floating, I didn't want to let the grease harden on it. However, I noticed the water was holding a lot of grease as I emptied it out, and the pan underneath was actually not as greasy as like a pan you just cooked in. So that was really good. One more step I'm going to do, since I'm not going to get the grease off of this the way I wanted to, is to come over here to this pan lined with some paper towels, and I'm going to spread that out here after I let some more water drip off and let it dry with hopefully the paper towels not just grabbing some of the water, but also some of the grease from my sausage. So my tray weighs 1 pound, 10.2 ounces before I put on my parchment, and now we're at 1 pound, 10.3 ounces. I'm going to tare my scale so it's not reading that, so we can see how much meat we actually have after it's cooked, because you lose the fat and all of that. So you're not going to have 3 pounds of meat anymore. My guess is right at 2.5 or less, which will allow me to put all of this on one tray. My 3 pounds of sausage cooked down to 1, oh, that's in fluid ounces. Let's get that back to pounds, 1 pound, 1.7 ounces. So I lost almost 2/3 of the weight to grease as this cooked. I am super impressed with how my sausage was feeling. So I've decided I can probably treat my hamburger the same way. It's been soaking a whole lot longer than my sausage had, but I'm going to go ahead and drain this and rinse it. Let it sit for a little bit, do the paper towel treatment. I'm going to divide this by mass between 2 trays and have my 2 trays weigh the same, and then get this in the freezer. I really want this to freeze for 24 hours, and I'd like to get this in the freeze dryer tomorrow afternoon. So I need to get this into the freezer if that's going to happen. So I will see you at the freeze dryer. So my load of hamburger and sausage and cheese has been running for just shy of 23 hours. I had 12 hours of extra dry time, so it's been running almost 9.5 hours of extra dry time. We'll see you guys in the kitchen next. We're back in the kitchen, and I'm going to use my freeze drying supplies bags for this. And first thing I'm going to bag up, because it'll be the easiest, will be my shredded cheddar cheese. So I will put today's date, which is January 11th of 23. And my contents, it was 1 pound shredded cheddar cheese. I'm going to go with the pre-freeze dried weight, so I have a better idea of the amount of quantity of cheese that's in here. I like these freeze drying supplies bags because they will hold up my funnel. They're gusseted on the bottom. They have that spot to write the directions or your contents, so it's at the same location all the time. So that makes that really handy. I'm going to hold on to my parchment as I dump my cheese into my funnel. And there we go. I've got 1 pound of shredded cheddar that is already bagged. I just need the OA to seal it. You'll recall that I actually cooked up 3 pounds of sausage, and it all fit on one tray. So whatever the mass is of just my sausage, I need to divide by 3 and bag up that way. So that way it's the same amount of sausage, even though it's going to be way lighter, as you would have had if you had cooked 1 pound of sausage. You don't want 1 pound of freeze-dried sausage. It's going to be way too much for your recipe. So currently my scale's on fluid ounces. I'm going to change my unit to grams, and then I'm going to tare my scale so it's not reading the bowl. Now I will add all of my sausage. Again, I put this on parchment to help suck up some of the grease. So the total mass of all 3 pounds of cooked freeze-dried sausage is 240 grams. So I'm going to need 80 grams in each of my bag. So if I take 80 off of 240, it's going to be 160 grams. then it'll need to read 80 grams, and then it will read 0 grams. So I'm going to go ahead and get my sausage bagged up into 3 bags. I bagged up the first third of my sausage, so I've got 160 grams left. Now, because this is sausage, and I know it's going to be fattier than a lot of meats, while this feels pretty good to my fingers and not too greasy, and it feels like styrofoam, I don't know how long this will freeze. I don't know how long this will stay good in my bags. So this is something that is probably more short term. I'm going to take it camping or on a trip, or I'm making a meal and need some pork sausage really fast. That's what I'm going to use this for. This is probably not for long-term storage. When I went to freeze dry this, by weight, I divided my hamburger into 2 trays, and I had started with 4 pounds of hamburger. So each tray I will divide in half by weight to know what 1 pound of hamburger would have been cooked. And then that way I will store it by the amount that should be 1 pound of cooked hamburger. My parchment doesn't look too terribly greasy. My meat doesn't feel terribly greasy. I'd rinsed this really well, so this might last quite a bit longer than the sausage. Again, I'm not sure how long-term any meat will be, but this should store longer than the sausage. My 2 pounds of hamburger freeze-dried is weighing 188 grams, so that means I will need 94 grams per bag to be 1 pound of hamburger cooked. So I'm going to go ahead and get this trayed up. I left 1 pound of my hamburger sitting out. I did not get that bagged up because I want to get this rehydrated and try to make something with it. So I think I'm going to make just some taco meat, and we've got a bunch of salad in the fridge. So I want some taco salads for lunch, and I don't want to have to cook a bunch of meat. So I'm going to do it this way. It'll shorten the time on making that taco meat really quickly. Might even be able to freeze dry the taco meat itself, so you'd only have to get it rehydrated. You can't overhydrate meat, is my understanding. So I'm going to start with, I was hoping I had enough beef broth, but I don't. I'm going to start with 1 cup of broth. I'm going to add some chicken to this, and then we'll see how this does. I am not sure that 1 cup is enough broth, so I'm going to go ahead and add a 2nd cup of broth. It's soaking it up pretty quickly. Some of it still feels very styrofoamish. So I don't think 1 cup was enough. We'll try 2 cups of broth here. So my meat's been sitting about 5 minutes, and it's feeling pretty good. It has not soaked up all of the broth I put on it. So I thought I would see it to just make sure it's rehydrated really well. I'm going to put this on a simmer and simmer off the rest of this liquid before I turn this into taco meat. This has cooked up beautifully. It went very quickly. There's no extra water in here anymore. So that was about perfect. Do 2 cups of broth, let it simmer on low for about 5 minutes, and then add your taco seasoning. I used a homemade. You can use a packet, whatever you would use for 1 pound of cooked hamburger. And now, let's see how this tastes. I have made myself what I think looks like a super tasty taco salad. So go ahead and give it a try. You would never know that meat had been freeze-dried. I'm going to finish my salad. Don't forget to check out Nessa's Nook. She's the one who has inspired me to work on filling my pantry with individual ingredients that I can pull out and use to cook a meal or put something else together. We're collaborating on some meal in jars together. So make sure you check out Nessa's Nook here on YouTube, and we'll see you next time.